All right, Contrell, we have a great group getting started here this morning. We're going to go ahead and get started because you have so much great information to share, and we want to make sure that we have enough time for all of it. I am Rachel Kraft with the Pennsylvania Family Support Team based at the Center for Schools and Communities, and I'm going to be your moderator today. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's presentation, Absent by Default, Challenging the Myth of the Missing Father. So I am very excited to introduce our presenter today, Mr. Contrell Armour, who serves as the director of the Pennsylvania Statewide Afterschool Youth Development Network, or PSAYDN. And that is a distinguished organization among 50 statewide after-school initiatives, and it's supported by the Mott Foundation. PSAYDN dedicates itself to advancing sustainable, high-quality, out-of-school time youth development programs. Now, prior to his current leadership role, Contrell was instrumental as a youth development program coordinator at the Center for Schools and Communities. So I'm really excited to have my colleague here today. And there he provided some essential consultation and technical support to schools and community-based organizations that were doing out-of-school time programs. Contrell's academic journey includes a bachelor's degree in psychology from Albright College and a master's degree in organizational development and leadership from Shippensburg University. With over 20 years of dedicated service to youth and family engagement, Contrell's passion lies in motivating others to embrace learning. Outside of his professional work, Contrell is a devoted father of three and an active presence in his community. He serves as an advocate, mentor, and coach to local youth, finding deep personal fulfillment in supporting and empowering young people and their families. I am so excited, and it is my pleasure to welcome Contrell this morning. Contrell, thanks for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my slides so that you can begin your presentation.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much, Rajel, for that very warm welcome. Hopefully you all can see what I can see right now, which is our opening slide, Absent by Default, Challenging the Myth of the Missing Father. It's basically reclaiming the narrative of fatherhood. As Rajel spoke, my name is Contrell Armour, and I'm so excited to talk a little bit today about the absent father, myth versus fact, and how to reclaim that narrative. As Rajel expressed in my bio, I am a father of three, which is the most important role that I have in my life. So as I'm here as the director of the After School Network, my role again as a father and title as a father has always been essential to me in my life. Being completely vulnerable and opening up today's session, I didn't grow up with a father. My father was absent. So it was that much more important to me when I became a father to make sure that I didn't repeat that cycle and became a very active father in my children's life. Thank you for allowing me to share some of your time today and share some of this information for this morning's session. Quickly, if we could check off our goals for the session, we're going to examine some of the origins and impacts of the absentee father myth. We're going to recognize some diverse ways that fathers are present and involved in their children's lives and sometimes not get recognized for that. And also explore some barriers and visibility to the engagement that fathers actually put forth and are part of. We're going to close out with a small reflection on reclaiming that narrative of the active fatherhood. And how we're going to get to those goals is we're going to start off with an icebreaker. I always think it's great to get everyone kind of talking and get a little loose a little bit and feel comfortable because, as Rajel also mentioned, this session is very interactive. Whether it's a poll, whether it's the chat, whether you're unmuting yourself, or the breakout sessions that we have scheduled during today's presentation, your input and your communication with one another is going to be pretty important and essential. We'll have some time for either personal or professional narrative sharing. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but in closing, understanding the importance of what we're going to do today, which is storytelling, the impact that storytelling will have on this narrative. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the closing reflection. So, as promised, our first breakout session or breakout room discussion today is going to surround an icebreaker around visible or invisible. So we're going to divide you all up into breakout rooms, and you are going to discuss this question. What's one meaningful way fathers show up for their children that often go unseen or unrecognized? Now, you can answer that question in your professional seat, or you can answer that question as in your personal or as a private citizen in being a father. So you have that leniency to address that question in either seat there.
All right, everyone should be coming back. They'll be back in about 5 seconds. Everyone should be back, Contrell. So there we go. The breakout room's just closed, so everyone should be back. All
All
right, everyone's
It's
back.
working fine.
all right. Welcome back. Welcome back. Hopefully you were engaged in some good conversation and some good sharing. Because what I'm going to ask now is for some volunteers from those different breakout rooms, if they would like to share to the entire group on some meaningful ways that was discussed here that fathers show up that are unseen or unrecognized. So did we have breakout rooms like room 1, 2, 3, 4, Rajel? Is that how they were?
We did. They might
Named?
not know which room they were in.
Okay.
Um,
All right.
would anyone just like to unmute and share?
Yeah, I'll share. One of the things that we discussed was about you have the fathers that actually put the effort into wanting to be there with their children, and sometimes the system doesn't always see that.
Okay. So you're identifying some systematic challenges.
Yes.
Okay, we're gonna dive into that a little bit. Great, thank you for that answer.
You're welcome. The lack of co-parenting too is a big thing that we've also brought up.
Okay, co-parenting, very good point there as well.
This is
Anyone?
Carlene. I was in room 5, Rajel. I knew my room number. We actually all got together and thought we couldn't come up with anything at first, but then we came up with a few. And one of the thing was if they're paying child support, you always hear of dads not paying child support, but you rarely ever hear, the good things they're paying, and they're, it's not a problem.
Did I hear you say, is it Carlene?
Yes.
Yes, thank you for sharing that, really appreciate it.
I hate to put them on the spot, but group 7, we had some good conversation.
Okay, we get a little bit of feedback from anybody that was in the breakout room 7?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. We talked about how, some dads just working at their work really hard to provide sometimes gets forgotten and overlooked.
Okay, so that maybe sometimes more than one job, working multiple jobs to meet the economic price on family.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And Contrell, there is one in the chat from Tia that I feel one meaningful way a father shows up is adopting a child that isn't biologically theirs.
Wow, that's pretty powerful, Tia. Thank you for sharing that.
Our
One thing,
I think I'm sorry. Group 2, I think we said that one thing is the conversations that fathers have with the children. Their teaching moments are often not recognized. Sorry.
No, that's great. Awesome. Thank you.
one thing that comes to mind is being active in your children's life. So my daughters play a lot of sports, and I'm on boards I'm a vice president for football, chairman for softball. So being active, it's one thing to just sign your kids up, but it's another to be active. And I think a lot of that gets unrecognized, unseen by other parents, because there's a lot of commitment involved in being not only a coach, but being a board member and having to go above and beyond.
Absolutely. And thanks for sharing that kind of unrecognized in that space where it is sports or extracurricular, because it's more than just the ride and the drop off, like you said, to actively be on top of schedules and practices. And many of the organizations now require some types of fundraisers or pledge that you'll be able to volunteer. It is an extra job. It is a part-time slash full-time job on top of all of the other work that is done. So thank you for sharing that. And as a father of three, I can tell you, I was Ubering before Uber existed, right? And Dick's was the favorite store to go to get everything in line. So great points right there.
And Contrell, there are a couple more in the chat if you want to take a few more before we move on. But there's
Sure.
discuss bringing the element of play, providing respite for mothers in leadership,
Yeah.
morning commute, taking children to school on public transportation. It makes my heart smile. Helping with homework, stepping up. We had a family where the roles were reversed. Dad had to work full time and take on all the duties as the mom went to further her education and moved away for a year. We discussed providing emotional stability through quiet consistency. And for me as a father, showing up as attending conferences and talking about the importance of father involvement in education and special needs.
All right. Awesome. All good stuff. I'm looking for my reactions here to put some love on that because where's my reactions? I can find so much here with that. Oh, well, I'm loving all of that. Thank you for sharing that in the chat. And as mentioned here, it probably wasn't the easiest icebreaker. It probably took a little bit of trying to figure out ways that fathers actually do show up. But hearing from those that unmuted themselves and reading from what was in the chat, I think you all are right on track of what we're trying to get out of in ways that fathers show up. It's not always the headline, it's not always in print. It's the things that happen almost day to day or hour by hour that justify and show the impact of fathers showing up. So now on your screen, you'll see about 10 blocks here. They were just little prompts if you were struggling to maybe help you reflect or bring back some from experience in working with families or being a parent yourself in different ways that fathers show up. So the emotional support, we heard a little bit about that in some comments, just the overall advocating behind the scenes and what takes place with that work, the multiple jobs that was expressed, I think, more than once already here in the workshop, and how that is so impactful and doesn't kind of put the father at the forefront sometimes. Modeling resilience is an unseen way that fathers show up. Showing up at the non-highlight moments, right? So when someone's awarded the trophy, it seems like the crowd is a little bit bigger. But when things are in that struggling or figure out moment, sometimes the crowd gets a little lighter. So thinking about those non-highlighted moments and being present and available during those times. You got the cultural factor, which comes around some storytelling or just other traditions or heritage keeping that fathers show up, sometimes unseen. As the protector, just consistent presence in her life, the teaching of life skills, and modeling healthy masculinity. We could probably do an entire workshop just on healthy masculinity, but for the sake of time today, we'll leave that one sit right where it's at with healthy masculinity. But important role for fathers that sometimes does not show up with our eyes, so to speak, or be invisible. Our next slide here, we're going to actually have a poll. So we're going to get into a little bit of some of the myths versus facts. So you'll see the first poll here that'll be launched. Is this a baseline belief for us to get an understanding of which statement have you heard more often in society or in the work that you do? A, fathers of color are absent, or B, fathers of color are highly involved. I want you to take a minute here and please answer that polling question. Which statement have you heard more often in society?
I think we had most people participate, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results.
Wow, 100%. Okay. Yeah, I'm not a research guy, but 100%, that's pretty impactful. I think that tells a lot. I don't know if I've ever seen a poll that had 100% answer from everyone on there, but I think we all are in somewhat of an agreement with a baseline belief that fathers of color um, uh, are more absent in their child's life than any other race. Let's talk about that a little bit here.
So Contrell, you have a couple of comments in the chat that it was difficult to answer for me, and that it's based on the stereotype. And also, Erin has her hand raised.
Yes, Erin, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself.
I was going to say, I think you had said it reflects that that's the group's belief, and I think it's actually more. I think what I was answering was what the narrative our society creates, not what my belief is. If that makes sense. Like, I think that there's intention to that narrative that comes from some really ugly places. And I think that the narrative itself is a contributing factor to how people show up and also how people are perceived to show up.
Yes, and thank you for that. I really appreciate that because I've misspoken saying you as your individual and each person on here as the group dealing in this space, the 100%. So you are exactly right, and I do appreciate again you being bringing that point up to be clear. It may not be your personal or the stereotype that you believe, but what is out there and what we are facing with this somewhat of a crisis in the myths of fathers not being involved, fathers of color not being involved. Thank you.
I had my hand raised too. Hi.
Oh, I think I could hear you and then it cut off. If you want to make sure you're unmuted.
There it is.
There you go.
Okay. I 1,000% agree with Aaron. And I think that I remember coming up in the 80s, there was definitely a lot of talk about absentee fathers and, communities of color. And it's been my experience that that is a negative stereotype that has been perpetuated. And it depends on your point of view and your vantage point, really, because I see and my children see their father being involved, and other fathers in our village being very much involved, not only with their own children, but with other children that are in the community. I see lots of positivity, lots of, like I said, public transportation. If you catch up to around 7:30 in the morning, right, on the subway, you'll see fathers from all different socioeconomic backgrounds, with their kids, dads with like sparkly pink backpacks, reading books on the subway. And I'm the one that said it makes my heart smile because it really, really does, because society would like us to believe the negative stereotypes that they're not involved, but they very much are.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that information. Let's go into a little bit of those myths and facts and a little bit of research that actually highlights what both of you just said and what I believe most of us here believe. So let's look at one of the myths versus a fact, that fathers of color are less involved, right? Data shows that Black fathers are more likely to engage in the daily caregiving activities. Another myth, that single fathers are absent. Many single fathers are primary caregivers. Where does this information come from? Let's take another look real quick at a myth versus a fact. where single fathers are absent, right? That's the myth. Single fathers are absent. Many single fathers are primary caregivers. Back to that point, you can see 20% of custodial parents are fathers. That was from the Census Bureau in 2017. And since 1960, I know that's a while ago, but it does show the trend in our society, right? So you can see here through some of the Pew research that single father households have increased ninefold since the 60s, and millions of single fathers actively care and support their children daily. We talked about a few of those or shared a few of those from the breakout session, but let's look at a little chart here that I have for a visual outside of what was stated there. If we look at the Black fathers, white fathers, and Hispanic fathers, this chart from the Center for CDC, Center for Disease Control, shows that the caregiving when it comes to like bathing and dressing, and you can see where Black fathers are percentage-wise compared to Hispanic and white fathers. So this is dismantling the myth that single, particularly fathers of color, are not involved in their children's lives. You can look at daily meals with children, very similar. And daily reading to children, which was another comment that was made here from one of the participants about taking time to read and work with their students in the education kind of field or in that education seat. So totally in agreement that the stereotype of single fathers not being involved, and particularly men of color not being involved in their children's life, is just not the facts. Here you have a truth. Any questions or any feedback on the data shared here around the myths versus facts?
I just have something to chime in. My father, he's African American, and he used to teach Black history in universities outside of being a civil engineer. And he said that the images, like since the 1970s and 80s of Black fathers, he said like, with Black exploitation films and things like that, he said is the furthest thing from the truth. But what he taught is that this all started going back as far as the slave days of families being forcefully separated. So he said, in spite of all of that, Black families have persevered through time, and there are a lot of really invested fathers. And yeah, my father was definitely one.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Really appreciate it. I think it's actually a really good segue to our next breakout discussion that we're going to have surrounding why these myths seem to kind of stick around. So as you just heard from one of the participants here, going all the way back as far as when slavery was legal here in the country, and how some of those things still are impacting the culture today. So again, here in the breakout room 2, why the myths stick. So you kind of have 3 prompts here in your discussions. You're going to talk about what some of the societal factors are that reinforce the myth. You want to look at some of the impacts of racism, whether that's the incarceration rate, the economic hardships, and how that perpetuates the myth of absent fathers, and how the myth affects self-perception and community views. So I don't want to give away too much here, but I'm really interested in what those discussions will bring about back to the main group. So please be prepared to share a little bit about societal factors, the impact of racism, incarceration, or economic hardships, and how it affects the self-perception or the community views of the absent father. So Rajel, can we go ahead and break everyone up and give another 7 minutes for discussion?
I just opened the rooms, and if you haven't been assigned to a room, I'm going to go ahead and assign you now. All right, folks are trickling back, but I see there must be some great conversations because not everyone's back yet. It looks like about 5 seconds, and everyone will be back.
Yes, I've been in those breakouts where I'm still yapping and then it cuts off and sends me back to the room. So that's a good sign. Good sign. Good conversation.
All right, everyone's back, Contrell.
All right. Welcome back, everyone, from the second breakout discussion on why the myths seem to kind of still stick around. You had a couple prompts around some societal factors, some impacts that racism and incarceration and economic hardships may have, as well as just how that myth affects the self-perception, or even I want to say the self-fulfilling prophecy and community views. So I would just ask now for people from the different breakout rooms to unmute yourself and share either of the prompts or any part of the conversation that you thought was impactful on why you think the myths still stick.
I can chime in from our group of what we discussed from the impacts of racism, incarceration, and economic hardship. One thing that we talked about was like cigarette companies and alcohol companies, especially like cigarette companies literally calling these missions called Project Scumbag to go into inner cities and sell their garbage products at cheap prices, thinking like, okay, these are the people that are disposable, so we don't care about their health. Or, the crack epidemic of like the 1980s in inner city communities coming from outside sources that could all easily have distributed or attributed to the the disintegration of Black families. So it's that systemic racism. And then also we went into the messaging that's sent to young African American men, that they see those images from like the 1970s, 80s, and even into today with these, funny jokes, quote unquote, in TV shows of, oh, the Black man doesn't hold a job, the Black man isn't a dad, the Black man isn't a this, that it feeds into their psyches that, oh, well, if the media is telling me and society's telling me that I'm not worth it, then why am I even trying? So that's basically all stuff we discussed.
Great, thank you for sharing. And you mentioned in here that piece about the self-fulfilling prophecy, and I think that's very important to pay attention to, that as young men, even teen fathers, or just young fathers or fatherhood, if self-fulfilling. So if I'm expected to not do anything, or I'm expected to not be present, when those times get tough for me to have an impact, for me to be present, and I can't, then I bow down to that self-fulfilling prophecy. Like that's the expectation anyway. So I think that can be a very powerful psychological kind of for fathers to really wrap their heads around, is that self-fulfilling prophecy that because you're not expected, then you just shouldn't, or feel guilty that you don't. So thank you for adding that.
One thing for me that kind of stands out about the myth sticking is in terms of the incarceration is that, again, with coaching and being a part of boards, that there's some dads who are of color that when they want to coach, the clearances come back and they're denied because of something that they did when they were 18 or 17, when they didn't have kids. They didn't change. They're like, becoming a father changes you. And seeing these guys now, and they're like the salt of the earth. They're the coolest guys in the world. They're great with these kids, and watching them interact and then telling them that they can't coach because of something that they did 20 years ago when they were a teenager, because it's failed on their clearances. I feel like that impacts it, because then when that happens the first time, they're not going to want to. They don't want to be involved at that point, because it's, they feel, and then the stigmata carries them around. And even with the organization, like you dads last year who wanted to coach, now they pulled their kids because they're embarrassed of something that they did 20 years ago.
Yes, thank you for sharing. I think that's a very important piece about the systems and some of the systematic barriers that single fathers, and particularly men of color, that could face. And that's one of them right there. Unfortunately, it only takes one or two that has put an extra, I want to say, lift on making sure that the adults that we have volunteering and coaching and supporting our youth are upstanding individuals. And I get it over time. People change, circumstances change, but it is unfortunate. It's unfortunate. And thank you for sharing that.
I think there's an idea of toughness being really important that leads people to look down on nurturing, loving, like very, very nurturing or maternalistic type behaviors as being effeminate. And then they're looked down on, right? Like treated poorly. And those small children, those boys grow up to be men, right? Like, and they've been being told they're not supposed to express loving, nurturative behavior because it makes them look weak. And then as a parent, like that's still there, right? And so I think that, and then just the narrative towards all fathers of them being incompetent or bumbling or whatever that we see, it's so pervasive across all forms of media, right? Like, and those two things playing off of each other just sort of create a self-fulfilling prophecy of not choosing to participate in those nurturative behaviors because of that sort of double whammy of you're really incompetent at this, and also you're not supposed to be weak. Like, and I think we really need to change the views of, like, move away from toxic masculinity overall as a society, and be especially gentle to communities that have been adversely impacted by racism and violence and in the carceral system.
Excellent. Thank you very much for sharing. I think you're right on point with all of that information. And yes, right on track.
So Contrell, we have a couple of people with their hands raised, but I wasn't sure if you were ready to move on or not. So there's
Let's
two
take,
folks
yeah,
that have their
yep,
hands.
let's take two hand raises. If you can call them out, Rajel, that'd be perfect. And then we'll move on. So let's take 2 hand raises.
Go ahead, Rhonda.
Oh, hi. I was just going to say that in terms of like the impact of racism historically, segregation, I think caused this impact as well, because our society is not very integrated even now. Over time, it got better, but people live very separate. So if you don't interact much with men of color, then you might be able to more easily just take these stereotypes or things you hear and embrace them as truth. But if you interact more with people different than you or from a different cultural background, then over time you'll learn to see, oh, these myths are not true. So I think that's part of the issue, that our society is not integrated enough to get to know each other and learn from experience versus what you hear.
Good point. Good
Thanks,
point.
Rhonda. And Aisha.
I think that some people choose to attack this topic without starting at its root in the historical origins. And I think that when you do that, you actually make people out to be something that they're not. So in an historical sense, I just think about how when African Americans or Black people were brought to America, we had no agency as a human being. We had no control over whether we wed or expanded our families. Like Black women were living handmaid's tale long before, the book was written. So if you start with no agency, like how can you model for a family? How could a Black man show these things when they were literally not given the space to actually exercise their leadership and all of these traits that we've been talking about? And then furthermore, when you go from there and you fall into Jim Crow, and then the new Jim Crow, and then mass incarceration where men are literally extracted from the homes, it's like, when is the opportunity for men to show up? When, like, you can't really blame or say, these people don't do this, whenever there has been a context for why they couldn't. And then I also thought about like the welfare system and how sometimes financial constraints will push women to not have men fully in their home. And then there's lack of access to employment opportunities and mental health resources, and then like mass incarceration, like I said, but like over incarceration. And so when I think of all of those things together, it's like if you started here with a family that was broken apart and unallowed, and that you were not allowed to have a unit, you can't look and then judge when you don't have a unit, when you're not given the opportunity, when you're not giving the tools, when you're not giving the space. So I'm sorry, I'm done.
No, no, thank you, Aisha. That's all great stuff. Again, I don't have the screen here to put my reactions up here, but that's all speaks here to the point of how these myths kind of still stick around and have stuck around for so long. So just real quick, I'm going to run through before we get to the next slide. Some of the societal factors is the way that television reports issues or crime. Many times you'll see the mugshot of a young African-American male, but have no contents around family or anything. It would just be all about what that crime is. That's kind of like some bad information there. As far as misuse of some statistics, right? So the CDC stat recently reported that 72% of Black children are born out of wedlock, right? So that can conflate the or to misrepresent that those fathers aren't involved in their children's life simply because they're not married or that child was born out of wedlock. So I do challenge everyone on here to look at those society factors that reinforce this myth. Look at the impact of incarceration, where men of color are incarcerated 5 or 6 times the rate as of the counterparts. The economic hardships in finding a good job with a decent wage, and as we spoke before, sometimes multiple jobs to make those ends meet, and then how that affects the perception of the community. So we can turn on the TV again, if it's not news. I grew up watching Different Strokes, right? Different Strokes was about a white man that adopted 2 Black children, right? And then even the friends of those 2 Black children during those seasons, their friends didn't have fathers in their life. I remember Dudley was one of Arnold's best friends. So I'm telling on myself a little bit now, time-wise. But yes, I didn't have a father. I grew up and seeing that if you wanted to have a good family and you were of color, you might need to be adopted. That's what that show told me. So there you'll see some of the community views and where they may come from through our media. The next slide here, and we're kind of running a little bit against some time here, but I would like anyone to unmute themselves right now and just share a story of a father that overcame some challenges to be present in their child's life. So again, in your private space or your professional, if we can get 1 or 2 people to share a story, I think it'll be pretty impactful.
Did you say share a story, a negative story or a positive story?
Oh, positive, where a father overcame the challenges to be present.
One of the best pictures I've ever received in my life was a photograph of a 16-year-old father I was working with who had his brand new, still wet baby tucked inside his shirt, doing skin to skin in the hospital while mom was recovering from a pretty serious emergency C-section. And that's not an image you see very often. And I thought it was amazing.
Thank you for sharing. Someone else.
I have a story from our father's group here at Outreach. We have a dad who attends our father's group, and our father's group is fairly new. He's 26 years old, and he has 4 little girls that are just so beautiful. But one day I had the opportunity to just talk to him, and he was telling me why he comes to the father's group, and he just talked about his own high school years, that he would come to school tired, fall asleep at his desk. He didn't do too good in school. And no one asked him why. Like nobody bothered to find out why this was true. And why it was true is because he did not have a good situation at his home. And the reason he comes to Father's Group is because he said he just wants a better life for his daughters. And he does that. We have a workforce development program that he participated in and got a really good job. He got a CDL license and he has a very good paying job and just loves his daughters, and they come here for different programs, and they're really great.
All right. Thank you very much for sharing. Really appreciate that. I wish we did have more time to hear more stories. And we're going to skip this poll 2 question here. So it was just kind of taking a sense of today's information and whether or not it feels like it's empowering you to do your work, or just in your seat as a professional. We do have a third breakout that we were going to talk about reclaiming the narrative. We don't have time to do the third breakout, but I would like to discuss that as the larger group right here. And that is some strategies to uplift and affirm fathers. When we talk about all of the negative stereotypes and impacts and language that's out there, it is going to take us to begin to uplift and affirm some of the work that fathers are doing. Some of those strategies will include inclusive language. So as we all know, being very particular about our invitations and how we reach out and communicate to families, particularly fathers, single fathers, intentional outreach. So it kind of goes along with that, knowing of single parents and only sending an invitation to the primary or only sending the invitation home in the book bag may not be good enough. We may have to pick up the phone. We may have to look at that second contact or find a way that we are inviting both parents or all caregivers to the space. And also being aware and informed about trauma practices, understanding people's experiences in their past, whether it was the way that they were raised or whether what they're experiencing in their communities have an impact. I work in the out of school time space and have for a long time. And in our parent engagement, we always talk about someone being available, someone being, assigned parent engagement to go to. But no one ever really talked about that person being approachable, right? So what am I saying? It's not just about having the position, but it's about having particular people in those positions that will welcome and encourage the outreach or the engagement from the single parents, particularly single fathers. So just understanding that sometimes your parent engagement liaison may look like the bill collector, right? Could look like the probation officer, could just look like the nagging neighbor. So we just want to be intentional about who we have in those positions, that they are approachable, so our parents feel comfortable to at least ask the question. So I would ask you to walk away today thinking about what action would you prioritize in your role? Is it the language? Is it the intentional outreach? Or is it being informed about the culture or the trauma-informed practices, or cultural relevancies that are out there? So we won't break out into the rooms for that. I apologize. This was just a really rich conversation so far. But in our closing reflection, I also want you to think about a truth that you wish people understood or acknowledged about fathers. And I would ask if we all could go ahead and start to blow the chat up. All right, that means just go ahead and enter your answer in the chat as this closing reflection is, what's one truth about fathers that you wish more people understood or acknowledged?
Is it okay to speak?
Yes, you enter the chat or go ahead and speak. Yes.
Okay, so this whole platform was very empowering for me, I would like to say. But when I look at the whole platform, I look at value. And from the perspective of value, when we value, say, each person as an individual, we will become more personal. I think we have created a climate that lacks that. And because it's a fight. As you fight against that climate, you can bring it to a place of value and how you perceive each person's race. And like someone else said on the platform, you're talking about personal. We have to be more, like you said, intentional, but it has to come with value. That's just my perspective. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. I don't have view to the, let me see, I do got view to the chat if I turn around here. Okay, so we are getting some things in the chat.
There's a lot of great things in the chat, Contrell.
Okay.
And we can actually collate these and send them out to everyone, because I think it's really powerful. It's really powerful to see these ideas that folks really want people to understand about dads. And I think this would be a good thing to share in our acknowledgement of attendance.
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and stop this share. Here's one last saying here before I depart, which would be, all right, so thank you, and kind of next steps that you see here on the slide deck. The first bullet here is continue sharing the stories. And I think it's important that I talk a little bit real quickly as we wrap things up about why this storytelling about fathers being involved is key. It counters the stereotypes with real voices, right? So we know storytelling has an opportunity for fathers to kind of reclaim their identity and sharing their life experiences. So it won't be the greatest father that will change these myths or change the perception in our society. It will be people like us that are in these seats that work with families and tell those stories. We know by storytelling, it builds empathy, right? So when people hear personal stories, they connect to them more on a human level. They may have some sense of understanding of the struggle. That's why it's important to share these stories. It inspires and it educates individuals. So when you think of fathers that may not be doing as well as they would like to, when they hear stories of other fathers doing well or maybe not doing as well as they would like to, there is a sense of inspiring and sharing of those stories. So think about the storytelling as a motivator for other fathers that wish they could step up or know that they're not the only ones in this challenging space. And then lastly, storytelling, it just breaks the cycle of silence and shame. When we invite our fathers to talk about the challenges that they have as single fathers, when we talk to fathers and give them that space, that voice, we probably would be surprised by each individual that we talk to on their challenges and how we could help support them come through it. So continue to tell the stories about the fathers that are doing great things for their children, for their families, and for their communities. That is how we'll change the narrative moving forward. I want to thank you all very much for, again, sharing your time with me today on this session. And I look forward to possibly connecting with you all in some other way sometime soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Contrell. We're going to make sure Contrell's contact information is in the chat so that if you all would like to reach out to him and talk with him more about this, we really appreciate you being here today. Just a really quick reminder, we would really love you to complete the survey when it comes out. It will be sent out to everyone who has registered, and it can be shared with anyone else who was watching with you. Just a note, this is our last webinar in our series for the 2024 2025 year. But we will be sending out very soon a professional learning survey. And that is your opportunity to tell us what you'd like to learn about in the coming year. So please do complete that. When it comes out, it will come to everyone on our family support list. Once again, thank you so much for being here. And Contrell, I want to thank you again for really opening up our eyes. I think it's really important to talk about these things and to talk about sometimes things that can be difficult to talk about but very much needed to talk about. So I really appreciate you providing this forum and really getting us engaged today. So thank you. And everyone, that concludes our webinar for today. Be sure to check out the recording when it's posted. Thanks so much.